Hello and welcome back to another update as we cover the latest developments throughout the front line in the Russo-Ukrainian war. We have some developments here in Avdiivka where there are two reports. The first one is that the Russians started offensive operations here in the Svedova Street, and with this it is moving on to the next phase after consolidating their gains here in the streets here to the northwest of the Russian positions. They're now expanding in a northeastern direction, trying to cut off this Ukrainian area right here. If we take a better look, we see that in the southern direction there are multiple trenches and fortifications of the Ukrainians in a southern direction, while here in the Svedova Street there really isn't that much from what we can see. This is old satellite imagery, so there could be more here today, especially looking here, there could be some being developed here. But we do see that the Russians have started operations in this direction, and with this they are likely going to move in the direction of Lemontova Street, and with that the other side here to the east could connect with them and use a double development tactic to cut off the Ukrainian forces here in the salient and completely isolate them from supplies and fully encircle them. As for the talks about the pipe which was connected here from the southeast in the direction of Tartohota, we have this map here which shows the entirety of the pipe. It actually goes all the way from the road right here and then goes through to the back of Tartohota right here. So this map clearly shows that the Russians' advancements here in this direction, capturing Tartohota, and their advancements within the residential area to the northwest of Tartohota. And this footage coming from that, where we see this video where they are welding the pipe from within it, likely making an exit in the direction of Tartohota at the end of the pipe. And with this we see that the Russian soldiers managed to get behind the Ukrainian fortifications, and since then everything started going well for the Russians, as they had just bypassed all of the important fortifications of the Ukrainians, and this is likely an operation that was planned for a long time, ever since they first found the pipe. And with that we see that all of these advancements were possible due to that. We also have this photo here which shows Russian soldiers within the pipe, and as we can see they were sitting there for a long time. They were operating within it, they were checking it out, making sure they know where it was. They likely also measured exactly where it was going and how long it was to know exactly where they're going to get out of it, and as such we saw them get out at the perfect area, which allowed them to capture Tartohota and subsequently the residential area to the northwest of that. And with this they are also focusing now on the central part of southern Avdiivka, which is the final parts of the high ground here to the south of Avdiivka. Now, another topic that was mentioned a lot in the comments is that about the plane which was shot down near the Kharkiv border. According to the Russian Ministry of Defense, the plane was carrying 65 Ukrainian prisoners of war, which they captured and was supposed to be in a prisoner exchange. And there was a second plane which was then turned around. According to the Ukrainians, the plane was carrying S-300 missiles, and it was likely going to be transporting it to the front so that they're able to use them. It could be both, it could be either side, but in the end what matters is what proof is going to be set forward, because the Ukrainians would have a hard time proving anything and the Russians would have an easy time proving it if it was the 65 prisoners of war. They just need to show the wreckage and the bodies subsequently coming from that wreckage, similar to the Prigozhin time, but in the Prigozhin time they never really showed any bodies. Therefore we heard the rumor by Budanov saying, although they believe Prigozhin has died, there's no evidence showing that he has died, which leaves us, who are YouTubers covering this war, a little bit of hope that we'll get the return of the Sith type of return of the Prigozhin to come and complain about lack of ammunition when they storm Avdiivka. And since Avdiivka is the focus, it led me to think, since everything moves so slowly, it gives a lot of time to think about what is happening and subsequently what will happen next. I've made a lot of prediction videos, but this one is going to be the one that I'm most sure about, and that is what comes after Avdiivka. To answer that question, we have to look at what the Russian army has done since the start of 2023, so a bit over a year ago. What we saw at the start of 2023 was a full Russian focus on one exact area, and that is the Bakhmut direction. The Russians managed to capture Soledar and Bakhmut after heavy fighting, including the Wagner forces, making a lot of advancements and subsequently finally capturing Bakhmut after many months of fighting. Since then, it has been fairly stable in the Bakhmut direction. There's been a bit of back and forth as a result of the Ukrainian summer offensive, and since then the Russian counterattack, recapturing some of the lost positions, especially in the northern direction. As for the southern direction, not a lot has been attained there. But if we take that focus and then look at the second one, which is the Avdiivka direction, which is called the second Bakhmut, because we again see another quote-unquote meat grinder, where a lot of soldiers are being thrown into this battle on both sides, allowing for heavy fights to take place in a small area. Now, if we take both of these and connect them together, the area which is closest to them is this area here, which includes 3 cities and towns. We have Toretsk, we have New York, and we have Konstantinivka. And this is likely the next target of the Russians. The reason for that is that we have 3 main supply hubs. We have Orlivka, north of Donetsk, we have Donetsk itself, and then moving on, we have Avdiivka, and then finally we have Bakhmut. All of these 3 connect at one place, and that is Konstantinivka. At the same time, what is the most strong and powerful Ukrainian defensive line in the Donetsk region? That is clearly the Sloviansk-Konstantinivka line, which goes through Sloviansk, Kramatorsk, and down to Konstantinivka. This defensive line has one big weakness, and that is if the Russians launch attacks from Bakhmut, capturing Chasiv Yar, and then fighting by Konstantinivka, from Orlivka, fighting in Toretsk and New York, and then towards Konstantinivka, and finally from Donetsk, northern direction towards Avdiivka, and in the direction of Konstantinivka, they'll be attacking Konstantinivka from 3 different directions, and that is the prime strategy of the Russians in this war. The tactical operation would be an attack from the north, capturing Chasiv Yar and the heights in that direction, allowing them to then use all of their forces in the northern direction towards Konstantinivka. The Ukrainians would have Konstantinivka as the main base, fighting the Russians head-on between Chasiv Yar and Konstantinivka, which leaves Bakhmut as the main supply hub for the Russians here in the north. As for the Orlivka direction, if the Russians launch an attack combined from the southern parts of Donetsk and Avdiivka, and as well from Orlivka in the direction of Toretsk, they'll be able to fight both towns at the same time, allowing them to pressure them both at the same time, and after months of fighting, they'll likely capture it. Then we can move on to Konstantinivka from this direction as well. So the Russians here would be looking to attack from multiple directions. Finally, if both Toretsk and New York ends up in Russian hands, then it would be much easier to move through the highway up to Konstantinivka and flanking it from behind, leaving the Ukrainians to defend 3 different directions, from the south, from the southeast, and from the northeast. And these 3 would be bypassing the Ukrainian defenses by attacking it from behind, and at the same time pressuring them from a wide front, allowing them to spread out the Ukrainian forces. They can then subsequently use that as the next quote-unquote meat grinder, which is in line with the Russian tactics. Based on that, we see that Konstantinivka is the most obvious target. If the Russians manage to capture Konstantinivka, then they can attack Kramatorsk and other areas within this line from the south and continue this operation by flanking it from behind as well as the front. The requirements for improving the risks and possibilities of the Russians making this operation successful would be first to take control over Avdiivka. That will release a lot of Russian forces from the Donetsk direction and allow proper supplies to be going through Donetsk, allowing them for further offensive operations in the Donetsk direction and a larger concentration of forces. A larger concentration of forces would allow the Russians to increase the amount of troops as well by Orlivka, where they will do a similar operation where they need to clear the Orlivka direction, at least for the short-range artillery units, allowing them to then push in the direction of Toretsk and New York to clear those 2 towns so that they're able to move in the direction of Konstantinivka. If the Russians manage to gain control over Toretsk, New York, and Avdiivka, then they would move on to operational attacks in the direction of Konstantinivka from both the south and the southeast. As for the Bakhmut direction, there's just one clear target, and that is Chasiv Yar. If the Russians manage to gain control over Chasiv Yar, then they can gain control over the canal line and move further in a northern direction. Moving in a northern direction by the canal line would allow the Russians to bypass the Seversk fortifications, which has stood front and hold the front line for a very long time, And if the Russians bypass it, reaching the Severodonetsk River, then it will be much easier for them to take control over Siversk. Taking control over Siversk would force all of the Ukrainian forces to withdraw from their frontline positions to the Sloviansk-Kramatorsk line. As that, we will see the Russians push further by the canal line in specific areas, for example, Jazov Yar and other areas, after which the fighting will reach the Sloviansk-Konstantinivka line. And if the fighting reaches the Sloviansk-Konstantinivka line and the Russians have control over Siversk, New York, Toretsk, and Avdiivka, then we will see the operation, which is attacking Konstantinivka from 3 different directions. In 2022, we saw the Russians having control over Liman and Izium here in the north, and as with those controls, we saw them push towards Barvinkove, which has an important railway that goes through to Sloviansk, and we also saw fighting in the direction of Sloviansk and Kramatorsk. However, Sloviansk and Kramatorsk are twin cities, essentially. They are very close to each other and they protect each other. At the same time, we have a river that goes through the eastern parts of Sloviansk and the western parts of Kramatorsk. So if the Russians attack from the east, they would have to attack Kramatorsk, and from the west, Sloviansk, subsequently attacking both at the same time. However, Konstantinivka is more isolated. It is more by itself. It is the weaker link of this defensive line. And if the Russians manage to capture Konstantinivka, then they can launch operations in a northern and western direction as they want. At the same time, if they manage to cut off the main connection between the north and the south of Donetsk, then they may launch offensive operations in a western direction towards Pokrovsk, which we will see if the Russians manage to capture the Rehorivka direction and move further westwards, cutting the southern parts off from the central part, which would be the Pokrovsk direction and the Uledar directions. And then we will see a Russian attack west of Pervomaisky towards Pokrovsk itself. With control over Avdiivka, they can also move in a western direction from there, especially with a larger concentration of forces in Donetsk, which would be possible if Avdiivka is under Russian control, preventing the Ukrainians from launching direct artillery fire within the city as much as they are doing now. So all of these things adds up to Avdiivka being one of the main cities that the Russians need control of to increase their operations in the Donetsk region and speed up their process of capturing the whole region, which is one of the official goals of the Russians with this invasion. So with all of that in mind, we see that there is one clear direction for the Russians, that is to focus on Avdiivka, move in a northern direction towards Konstantinivka, moving westwards from Bakhmut towards Jazov Yar, and northwards to cut off Siversk. All of this would allow them to then focus on Konstantinivka from the north, southeast, and south, and then subsequently attacking the weakest link of the Sloviansk-Konstantinivka line. And this, since you all love timeframes, will give Avdiivka until the 20th of May for this annual capture of a city for the Russians, after which we'll see operations going in the northern and western direction of Bakhmut, northern of Avdiivka, and western of Orlivka. All of this will likely take place all throughout 2024. What results will appear from that, no one knows, but in the end, that is likely the goal of the Russians, to move in a further western direction. But this would mean that the Russians would not successfully capture Donetsk in 2024, which would mean, again, Prigozhin, sorry for your memory, but 2024 didn't make it. That is because Wagner is no more in full strength, and they would have probably just rushed everything and captured Avdiivka in a much shorter time. And that is going to be all for this update. Thank you all for watching, and have a great day.